Keanu Reeves stood quietly in the glow of a McDonald's, his unassuming presence a stark contrast to the Hollywood stardom he carries so effortlessly. Around him, weary customers shuffled past, their indifference casting a shadow over two small figures in faded green dresses. But what happened next would turn a simple meal into a life-changing journey and ignite a spark of hope no one saw coming. Before we dive into this inspiring tale, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. If you love stories that warm the heart and lift the spirit, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we've got another amazing story waiting just for you. Keanu Reeves stepped out of the trailer, his shoulders relaxed, but his spirit still buzzing from a day that felt like a gift. He'd just wrapped a scene that hit close to home, a moment where his character pulled a frightened child from danger, cradling them with a tenderness that stirred something deep inside him. As the director, a gruff but kind-hearted man named Tom, clapped him on the back, Keanu felt a swell of pride. "You nailed it, Keanu," Tom said, his voice warm with admiration. "That's the kind of heart people need to see." Keanu nodded, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. "Thanks, Tom. It's days like this that make it all worthwhile." At 60, he'd learned to treasure those moments, not just the applause, but the chance to touch lives through his craft, to remind folks that even in a tough world, goodness still mattered. Around him, the crew buzzed with end-of-day energy, their laughter and chatter a comforting hum after hours of focus. Lisa, the makeup artist, with a grin that could light up a room, waved him over. "Come on, Keanu, first round's on me, let's celebrate." The invitation hung in the air, wrapped in the warmth of friendship forged over long days and shared dreams. For a heartbeat, he was tempted. Those bonds were precious, especially now, when time seemed to slip by faster than it used to. But tonight, his soul craved something quieter, a chance to breathe and listen to the whispers of his own heart. "You're all too good to me," he said, his voice soft but firm, "but I've got to sit this one out. Next time, I promise." Lisa groaned playfully, but her eyes twinkled with understanding. "You'd better keep that promise, mister," she teased, and Keanu chuckled, feeling the weight of their affection settle over him like a favorite old coat. As the crew drifted off, he made his way to his car, the day's efforts tugging at his bones. He wasn't young anymore, and he felt it. Those aches were old friends now, reminders of a life lived fully. Sliding into the driver's seat, he checked his phone and saw a text from his buddy Daniel. "Caught up at a shoot. Can we push drinks back a couple hours?" Keanu's heart dipped with a flicker of disappointment. He'd been looking forward to catching up, swapping stories like they used to. But then came a wave of relief, a little gift of time to recharge. "No worries," he typed back, fingers steady on the keys. "Let me know when you're free. I'll grab a breather and meet you later." Starting the car, he pulled onto the highway, the hum of the engine a soothing rhythm against the fading echoes of the set. He'd always been a man who listened to his instincts, and tonight they told him he needed a pause, a moment to feel human again, not just the guy on the screen. That's when he spotted the golden arches of McDonald's glowing like a beacon in the dusk. It wasn't fancy, but to Keanu it was a slice of comfort, a place where he could blend in and just be. He signaled, pulled into the near-empty lot, and stepped out, stretching his arms with a quiet groan. At his age, those little creaks were badges of honor, proof he'd kept going, kept giving. Inside, the familiar glow of the lights wrapped around him like an old friend's hug. He tapped through the kiosk menu, cheeseburger, fries, coffee, simple pleasures that never got old. Receipt in hand, he found a booth in the back, away from the handful of other folks scattered around. Settling in, he let out a slow breath, the tension of the day melting away. That scene he'd filmed kept replaying in his mind, the child's wide eyes, the weight of their trust in his arms. It wasn't just acting, it pulled at memories he rarely spoke of. Back in New York, decades ago, he'd been that kid, hungry, uncertain, watching his mom scrape by with nothing but grit and love. He'd made it through, found his way, but those days never really left him. They were why he worked so hard, why he cared so damn much. Sipping his coffee, he felt a quiet gratitude for the life he'd built, for the chance to keep telling stories that mattered. This stop at McDonald's wasn't just about food, it was about grounding himself, remembering where he'd come from and who he still wanted to be. For folks like him, and maybe for you watching this, life's sweetest moments aren't always the big wins. Sometimes they're the small ones. A warm meal, a kind word, a chance to rest after a long haul. Keanu leaned back, eyes half closed, savoring the stillness. He didn't know it yet, but that stillness was about to crack wide open, revealing a purpose bigger than he'd ever imagined. Two little souls in green dresses were about to walk into his night, and into his heart, proving that even at 60, the best chapters might still be unwritten. Keanu sat in the booth, the warmth of his coffee seeping into his hands, a small anchor in the sea of his thoughts. He'd closed his eyes for just a moment, letting the hum of the McDonald's settle around him like a familiar tune, when a flicker of movement tugged at his senses. Blinking, he focused across the room and saw them, two little girls, no more than 10 or 11, weaving between tables with a grace that belied their circumstances. They were twins, mirror images in faded green dresses, the fabric worn thin but still clinging to a whisper of childhood innocence. Their small hands reached out, tentative yet practiced, and their eyes, oh, those eyes, sparkled like lost stars, searching for kindness in a sky that seemed to have turned its back. Keanu watched, captivated by the quiet dignity in their steps, a purity that stood out against the fluorescent glow and the clatter of trays. Around them the world kept spinning, but it wasn't a kind spin. A man in a rumpled suit waved them off with a grunt, his face creased with irritation as if their presence soiled his meal. A woman clutching a purse tighter turned away, her silence louder than any words. Even the staff, young kids wiping tables, older ones behind the counter, looked through them, their eyes glazed with a practiced indifference that spoke of routine, not cruelty. Keanu felt a pang, sharp and familiar, ripple through him. He'd seen that look before, decades ago, when he was the one on the outside. Standing on a New York curb, belly empty, holding out a trembling hand for a crust of bread. Back then, the world had felt like a mirror cracked down the middle, reflecting only the parts too broken to fix. Now, at 60, he knew better. Those cracks weren't the whole story. They were where the light got in, where hope could take root, if someone dared to plant it. He couldn't tear his eyes away as the twins moved toward the glass doors, slipping outside like shadows. Through the window, he saw them pause by a trash can, their small figures hunched in the dim light. One reached in, pulling out a half-eaten burger, and they sat at an outdoor table, dividing it with a care that broke his heart. Each bite was measured, each glance between them a silent pact of survival. Keanu's throat tightened, a mix of sorrow and awe washing over him. They weren't just eating, they were holding on to each other, onto life, in a way he'd forgotten people could. It was a scene too raw, too real, for a man who'd spent years playing heroes on screen. This wasn't a script. It was a quiet cry from the edges of a world he'd been lucky enough to climb out of. And in that moment, something stirred in him, an ember of belief, flickering but fierce, that kindness could still shift the tides of fate. His order number flashed on the screen, pulling him from his reverie. He stood, legs steady but heart unsteady, and grabbed his tray, eyes still tracing the girl's outlines through the glass. Back at his booth, he barely touched his food, the fries cooling as his mind raced. Then the doors swung open again, and there they were, stepping back inside with a weariness that no child should carry. They hesitated, their green dresses catching the light as they edged closer to his table. Keanu straightened, softening his gaze to meet theirs. Up close, those starry eyes held a depth that stole his breath. Fear, yes, but also a resilience that echoed his own younger self. The taller one, by barely an inch, spoke first, her voice a fragile thread above the hum of the restaurant. "Sir," she whispered, "we need money for medicine, for our mom." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling through him with a force he hadn't braced for. Medicine, not food, not a toy, but medicine for their mother. Keanu's chest tightened as the weight of their sacrifice sank in. These weren't just kids scraping by. They were daughters, fighting for the one person who mattered most, their love a lifeline in a storm he could only imagine. He thought of his own mom, her tired hands, her unwavering will, and the memory wrapped around him like a hug he hadn't known he needed. "Are you hungry too?" he asked, voice low and gentle, afraid to shatter the moment. They exchanged a glance, a silent conversation born of years together, then nodded, their eyes flickering with a hope they barely dared to hold. Keanu felt that ember flare into a flame, a quiet, steady fire of purpose. He'd been given so much in this life, more than he'd ever dreamed as that hungry boy on the street. Now, here were two souls asking not for pity, but for a chance. And he knew, with a clarity that hummed in his bones, that he couldn't walk away. Not tonight. Not from them. For anyone who's ever felt invisible or seen someone else fade into the background, this moment was a bridge. Between Keanu's past and their present, between despair and possibility, it was a chance to prove that even the smallest act could light up the dark. He leaned forward, ready to listen, ready to help, because sometimes destiny doesn't shout, it whispers, in the voices of two little girls in green dresses, waiting for someone to hear. Keanu sat there, the twins' whispered plea, "Medicine for our mom," echoing in his mind like a bell tolling through the fog. Those words weren't just a request, they were a window into a world he'd once known. A world of love stretched thin by hardship. He looked into their starry eyes, seeing not just hunger but a fierce, fragile devotion, and something inside him shifted, a gear clicking into place after years of rust. "Wait here," he said, his voice steady as he rose from the booth, a quiet resolve settling over him like armor. He didn't just want to help, he needed to. At 60, he'd learned that life's truest moments weren't scripted. They were the ones you stepped into, heart first. He moved to the counter with purpose, the hum of the McDonald's fading behind the pulse in his ears. "2 Happy Meals," he told the cashier, a lanky kid named Ryan whose eyes darted nervously. "And throw in a couple of those toy keychains, something fun." Ryan nodded, but his voice dropped low as he handed over the receipt. "Those girls, they're trouble, man. Better steer clear." Keanu tilted his head, searching the kid's face. "Trouble for who?" he asked, soft but firm. Ryan shrugged, glancing away. "Just saying what I'm told. Someone's always watching them." The warning hung there, cryptic and cold, but it only steeled Keanu's resolve. He wasn't a stranger to shadows. He'd walked through plenty in his own time. If someone was watching, let them see this. Back at the booth, he set the colorful boxes down, the toys glinting under the lights. 2 little kitty keychains, simple but bright. "These are for you," he said, sliding them across the table. The twins froze, their small hands hovering, as if afraid the moment might vanish. Then, slowly, their fingers closed around the gifts, and their eyes lit up. Tiny sparks of joy piercing the gloom they carried. The taller one clutched her keychain tight, a smile breaking through like dawn after a long night. "Thank you," she whispered, and her sister echoed it, a duet of gratitude that wrapped around Keanu's heart. It wasn't just food or toys he'd given them, it was a promise, a vow that they weren't invisible, not to him. For a man who'd spent decades playing saviors, this felt more real than any role. This was love in action, small but seismic. But the light dimmed fast. A shadow loomed as a woman stormed in, her face etched with exhaustion and fury, hair a tangled mess framing wild eyes. "What the hell are you doing with my kids?" she snapped, yanking the girls back, their Happy Meals teetering on the table. Keanu stood, hands raised, voice calm but unyielding. "I'm just trying to help. Are you their mom?" She glared, her anger a wall, but beneath it he saw cracks, fear, shame, a mother's desperate edge. "None of your business," she growled, tugging the twins toward the door. They looked back, eyes wide with longing, the keychains still clutched tight, and Keanu felt a stab of loss. He couldn't let it end there, not when he'd seen that spark, not when he'd heard their why. "Sandra," he called, guessing her name from a faded tag on her jacket, his tones softening. "I'm Keanu. I don't mean any harm. Can we talk?" She stopped, shoulders tense, then turned, her gaze wary but wavering. "You don't know us," she said, voice brittle. "You don't know what we're up against." He took a step closer, careful, like approaching a wounded bird. "Then tell me. I want to understand." For a long moment she studied him, searching for a lie. Then she sighed, a sound heavy with years, and motioned to the booth. "Sit. But don't expect a fairy tale." Sandra's story spilled out in jagged pieces, each one cutting deeper. "I'm sick," she said, her voice low, raw. "Cancer, can't afford the pills. The girls, they've been begging to keep me alive." She looked at them, her twins, Lily and Mia she called them, and her eyes glistened with a love too big for the pain it held. "We lost everything. Job, home, hope. Years ago. Now it's just us, and they're all I've got." Keanu listened, his chest tight, picturing those green dresses worn thin not just by time, but by a world that had turned away. "No one helps," she added, bitter but resigned. "They see us, but they don't see us. You get it?" He nodded, slow and sure. He got it, too well. He'd been the kid no one saw, until someone did. Now it was his turn. Inside, a question burned. If not me, then who? It wasn't arrogance, it was duty, carved into him by every struggle he'd survived, every kindness he'd received. He'd asked it before, in quiet moments after a long day, but never had it rung so clear. Sandra's pain, Lily and Mia's courage, they weren't just a chance encounter, they were a call. "You're not alone anymore," he said, meeting her gaze. "Let me help. For them, for you." Her lips trembled, doubt warring with a flicker of trust. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I've been where you are," he answered, voice thick with memory. "And someone gave me a hand once. It changed everything." The twins watched, their small faces alight with something new. Hope, fragile but growing. Sandra's wall cracked further, a tear slipping free. "Okay," she said, barely audible, "but it's not easy." Keanu smiled, faint but real. Nothing worth doing ever is. For folks who've lived long enough to know life's shadows, this was a truth they'd feel in their bones. Help isn't just given, it's fought for, step by step, heart by heart. Keanu stood at the edge of that fight now, not as a star, but as a man who'd learned that love could be a beacon, even in the darkest night. Keanu stood outside the McDonald's, the night air cool against his skin, but inside, a fire burned, fueled by Sandra's confession and the twins' quiet bravery. "Where do we go?" he asked, his voice steady, eyes locked on hers. Sandra hesitated, then pointed toward the dimly lit parking lot. "There's a man, Victor, he's got Mia. Said if we don't pay up tonight, she's gone for good." Her words trembled, but her jaw set hard, a mother's love wrestling with despair. Keanu nodded, a plan forming behind his calm exterior. "Take me to him," he said, simple and sure. Lily clung to Sandra's hand, her green dress catching the streetlight, and Keanu felt a surge of purpose. At 60, he'd faced plenty, grief, struggle, the weight of years. But this was different. This was a fight for light in a darkness he couldn't ignore. They walked in silence, Sandra leading the way, through streets that grew rougher with every step. Lily's small hand tightened hers. Keanu followed, his mind racing. He'd played heroes who stormed into battle, guns blazing, but this wasn't a movie. This was real. Messy, raw, and urgent. They stopped at a battered trailer parked crookedly near a trickling stream, its rusted shell a grim testament to forgotten lives. Sandra knocked, her fist shaking, and the door creaked open. Victor emerged, a wiry man with a smirk that didn't reach his cold eyes, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Well, look who's back," he sneered, glancing at Sandra, then sizing up Keanu. "And who's this, your knight in shining armor?" Keanu stepped forward, unflinching. "I'm here for Mia. Let her go." Victor laughed, a harsh bark that grated the air. "You think you can waltz in and play hero? Law's a joke around here, pal. Cops don't care about trash like us." His words dripped with contempt, but Keanu saw the truth beneath. A system rotted through, leaving people like Sandra to fend for themselves. "Maybe they don't," he replied, voice low and firm. "But I do." "How much to get her back?" Victor's eyes narrowed, calculating. 500, cash. Now. Keanu reached for his wallet, pulling out what he had. 300 crumpled bills, then turned to Sandra. She fumbled in her pocket, adding her meager stash. "That's all we've got," she said, desperation cracking her voice. Victor snorted, crossing his arms. "Not enough. She's already promised to someone. rich guy, big tastes. The implication hit Keanu like a punch, rage flaring hot and fast, but he swallowed it, channeling the calm he'd honed over years of facing chaos. "I'm Keanu Reeves," he said, pulling out his ID, letting the name hang there. Victor's smirk faltered, recognition flickering. "Bullshit," he muttered, but doubt crept in. "Believe it or not, that's your call," Keanu said. "But I've got more than money. I've got a voice. You let her go, or I make sure everyone hears about this." It wasn't a bluff, it was a lifeline, thrown with every ounce of his will. For a tense moment, Victor stared, then shrugged, tossing the cigarette aside. "Fine, 400. Take her and get lost." He disappeared into the trailer, returning with Mia, her green dress dirt-streaked, her eyes wide with fear that melted into relief when she saw Sandra. "Mom!" she cried, breaking free and running into her mother's arms. Sandra dropped to her knees, pulling both girls close, tears streaming as she held them like they might vanish again. Keanu watched, his throat tight, pride swelling in his chest. That reunion, their sobs blending into a shaky laugh, was a melody of hope, a sound he'd carry forever. He'd given them more than a night. He'd given them each other. But Victor wasn't done. As Sandra stood, clutching her girls, he leaned in, voice low and venomous. "You think this fixes anything? There's dozens more kids just like her, stuck in this hell. You're one guy. What's that worth?" The words landed heavy, a dark seed planting itself in Keanu's mind. He met Victor's gaze, unflinching. "One guy can start something," he said, quiet but ironclad. "And I'm not stopping here." Victor scoffed, turning away, but Keanu saw the flicker of unease, a crack in the armor of a man who thrived on others' despair. Sandra looked up, her face a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "You didn't have to do this," she said, voice thick. "Why risk it?" Keanu crouched to her level, meeting her eyes, then the twins. "Because you're worth it," he said simply, "and because I've seen too many people left behind. Not tonight." Her lips quivered, a spark of belief igniting where hopelessness had reigned. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a fighter, standing beside him now, her girls safe in her arms. That shift, subtle but seismic, lit a fire in Keanu's soul. He'd faced the darkness, not with fists, but with heart, and planted a seed that could grow. For anyone who's ever wondered if one voice matters, this was proof. It does. Victor's taunt lingered. Dozens more. And Keanu felt its weight. He'd saved Mia, given Sandra a lifeline, but the fight was bigger than this trailer, this night. At 60, he knew life wasn't about easy wins. It was about the battles you chose, the ones that kept you up, dreaming of a better dawn. As they walked away, Lily and Mia clutching their keychains, Sandra's shoulders straighter than before, Keanu made a silent vow. This wasn't the end, it was a beginning, a spark in the dark, ready to blaze. Keanu led Sandra, Lily, and Mia away from the trailer, the night's weight lifting with each step they took together. The twins clung to their mother, their green dresses swaying in the breeze, while Sandra's eyes darted between fear and fragile trust. "Where are we going?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Keanu glanced back, his gaze steady. "Somewhere safe," he said. "My place. You'll be okay there. For now." At 60, he'd seen enough of life to know safety wasn't just a roof. It was a promise. One he intended to keep. He opened the car doors, helping them in, and as he slid behind the wheel, a quiet certainty settled over him. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a lifeline, a chance to rewrite a story too many had left unfinished. The drive was hushed, the hum of the engine a soft counterpoint to the twins' shallow breaths in the back seat. Sandra stared out the window, her hands twisting in her lap while Keanu's mind churned. Victor's words, dozens more, echoed like a challenge he couldn't shake. One family saved was a victory, but it wasn't enough, not when the darkness stretched so wide. His phone buzzed, snapping him back. It was Ethan, an old friend from his stuntman days, now with the FBI. "Hey man," Keanu answered, keeping his voice low. "I've got a situation, something big." Ethan's tone sharpened. "You okay? What's going on?" Over the next few minutes, Keanu spilled it all. The twins, Sandra's illness, Victor's network. Each word a brick in a wall he hoped could hold justice. Jesus, Keanu, Ethan breathed. That's a hornet's nest. Give me the location. I'll get a team moving. As dawn hinted at the horizon, they pulled up to Keanu's villa, its gates swinging open like arms welcoming them home. Lily and Mia's eyes widened, their small gasps filling the car. "This is yours?" Lily asked, awe threading her voice. Keanu smiled, a lump rising in his throat. "For tonight, it's ours." He ushered them inside where Maria, his housekeeper, greeted them with a warmth that needed no explanation. "Rooms are ready," she said, her eyes soft as she took in the girls' weary faces. Sandra hesitated, gripping her daughter's hands. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, her voice cracking. Keanu met her gaze, honest and unguarded. "Because everyone deserves a shot at something better, and I've got the means to give it." Her tears fell then, silent and grateful, and for the first time Keanu saw her shoulders lift, as if a burden had begun to slip away. The next days blurred into action. Ethan called back, his voice taut with purpose. "We raided the camp, found 16 kids, Keanu. Victor's in custody, but it's bigger than him. We're digging deeper." Keanu exhaled, relief mingling with resolve. "Keep me posted," he said, "and thanks, Ethan." He turned to Sandra, who'd been listening, her face a mix of shock and hope. "They're safe?" she asked. "For now," he replied, "but we're not done." He saw it then, a spark in her eyes, a fighter waking up. She wasn't just a survivor anymore, she was part of something larger, a ripple spreading outward. That night, he watched Lily and Mia chase each other in the villa's garden, their laughter a sound so pure it nearly broke him. Sandra joined him on the terrace, her voice soft. "I forgot what that sounded like," she said, wiping her eyes. "You gave me back my girls." Keanu shook his head. "They gave me something too, purpose." But the real surprise came weeks later. With Ethan's team dismantling the network, Keanu poured his energy into a dream, a center for kids like Lily and Mia, a place not just to live but to heal. He called it Green Light Haven after those faded dresses, and made it more than a shelter. It was a school too, an arts academy where pain could turn into paint, song and story. Sandra, now in treatment and sober, helped shape it, her strength a quiet force beside his. Then, at the opening, Lily and Mia stepped up, their voices trembling but clear. "We wrote this," Mia said, holding a crumpled sheet. They sang, a simple melody about shadows and stars, about a man who saw them when no one else did. The crowd, hundreds strong, fell silent, then erupted tear-streaking weathered faces as the twins' words wove hope into the air. Keanu stood back, his chest tight with pride and something deeper. Peace. At 60, he'd thought his best days were behind him, but here they were, blooming in the laughter of kids he'd helped save, in the song of two girls who'd turned their scars into strength. Sandra squeezed his arm, her smile weary but real. "You didn't just save us," she said. "You showed us we could save others." He nodded, words failing him as he watched the twins bow, their green dresses swap for new ones, bright and bold. The center wasn't just a building, it was a legacy, a proof that one act of courage could echo across lives, across years. For those who've lived long enough to know hope can falter, this was a reminder. It doesn't die. It grows, in the hands of a man who dared to care, in the voices of children who found their song, in a community that chose light over shadow. Keanu looked out at the faces, old and young, broken and mending, and knew this was his truest role. Not a star, but a spark, lighting a fire that would burn bright long after he was gone. Keanu Reeves' journey teaches us that heroes don't need capes, just hearts brave enough to see the unseen. From a quiet McDonald's booth to a legacy of light, he showed that one act of kindness can shatter darkness, that compassion can ripple beyond a single life to lift dozens more. For Sandra, Lily, and Mia, he wasn't just a savior, he was proof that hope thrives where courage dares to step in. At 60, he reminds us, age is no barrier to purpose. Every day offers a chance to mend a broken world. This story whispers a truth we all know deep down. We're never too small, too tired, or too late to make a difference. So let's carry that spark, light it in our own corners. Love this tale? Subscribe now. Your support fuels more stories of heart and hope. Next one's coming tomorrow.